The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm thrilled that Lewis is back because we have such a huge show today. There's the story I want to talk about that has been going completely viral, making headlines over the last 24 or so hours. And it's about a vulture capitalist increase to the price of an AIDS medication. You might have heard about 32-year-old former hedge fund manager turned pharmaceutical businessman Martin Shkreli, who purchased the rights to a 62-year-old drug used for treating a number of life-threatening parasitic infections. And he raised the price overnight from $13.50 per tablet to $750 per tablet. The drug is Daraprim. It's used for treating toxoplasmosis, which is a parasitic infection that can be life-threatening in babies and for people with poor immune systems, like, for example, AIDS patients, cancer patients, etc. It was selling for slightly over $1 a tablet several years ago. The prices have increased every time the drug was sold from one pharmaceutical company to another. And now, most recently, this 5,500% price increase since Shkreli acquired it. And according to Shkreli, they're going to use the money they're going to make from increasing the price to develop better treatments for toxoplasmosis. He says this isn't greedy. He says this is being done in order to create better treatments. Now, he did an interview on CNBC, and the CNBC anchor didn't even agree that a better treatment was needed. Shkreli disagreed. Let's take a look at what he had to say about this incredible price increase.
Shkreli joins us now from the NASDAQ. He's the CEO of Turing Pharmaceuticals. Martin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, you guys have said that the reason you increased this price so much after acquiring the drug was in order to do the research and development to develop a better version of Daraprim. I just got off the phone with an HIV doctor who told me they don't need a better version of this drug. What are you doing here?
Yeah, that's not true. There's a recent paper that suggests that 2 patients died due to autoimmune encephalitis from toxoplasmosis. So there's a lot of people who die of toxoplasmosis every year and this field desperately needs new ways to treat toxoplasmosis. For instance, the current drugs right now target the folate receptor of the bug. There's no other way to kill toxoplasmosis as of right now. So we're working hard on trying to find new ways to do that.
So what a lot of companies do is raise venture capital funding when they see an important market for a drug, rather than raising the price on the current patients who need it to survive and who have no other choice but to take it and pay the higher price. Why wouldn't you go that route?
Well, we did raise one of the largest Series A financings in history for a biotech company. We raised over $90 million. And we also feel that this is the more appropriate price for Daraprim.
This is a huge, huge issue, and Shkreli defended their actions 100%. And there was a good point made, which is why usually when you want to develop a better drug, you don't increase the price of the current drugs we have, which just affects the people who are sick. You raise venture capital. And Shkreli responding, Lewis, saying, yeah, we did that. We raised $90 million, but we're raising more money in order to do this. This is very, very sketchy, but I don't even care about Shkreli specifically. What I care about, Lewis, is that this is exposing the corrupt and immoral nature of how we function in this healthcare world. Healthcare is considered a product to be bought and sold for profit on the capitalist market. This includes healthcare treatment, and obviously it includes drugs, when we should really be talking about healthcare and access to medications as a right, as an issue of public health.
Yeah, well, this is an issue you can tackle on many fronts, right? You have the for-profit healthcare system with health insurance companies.
Right.
You have the patent system, which some people say we need to do away with because it is causing medications to have prices like this. It's a complicated issue.
Hugh Reinhardt, who is a healthcare economist, said, quote, he, being Shkreli, bought the patent and he's milking it for all it's worth. In a way, I thank him because it's really sort of like putting a sign on your back saying, kick me. Sometimes you need some sentinel effect that wakes people up. Look at the difference in prices for the same drugs in the United States and in other countries. And we've talked many times, Lewis, about the exact same drug, not an inferior version, but the same drug being sold for a fraction of the price in countries like India and in European countries and even in Canada compared to the prices in the United States. This is where standard corporate vulture capitalism is an infection that needs to be cured. And that is the status quo of the healthcare industry. We are, I am a capitalist, right, Lewis? I believe in enterprise and in creating businesses, but I believe in regulated and controlled capitalism that takes into consideration the broader good. And here we have gotten lost thinking about the broader good when it comes to healthcare and medication, and we're just so far from it.
It's all about profit. Luckily for many Americans, we are able to receive those drugs that come in from India and Canada. Can you imagine the situation we'd be in if that did not happen?
Yeah, able to, in spite of what the law is, right? I mean, you can go online and order some of these medications from other countries, but it's not really legal.
Well, no. In many cases, you can get drug prescriptions for these, alternative drugs. I suppose in some cases it could just be the patent has expired, or there are situations like that. But we are able to get some of those drugs here.
2 down and 14 to go. I'm talking about the Republican primary race, where now, in addition to Rick Perry dropping out of the campaign, Wisconsin Governor, perennial loser and job destroyer Scott Walker has dropped out of the 2016 Republican presidential primary campaign. He got no traction. He made no impact. The early polling showed that there was some support for Scott Walker, but once he opened his mouth as part of the campaign, he ended up polling under 0.5 percentage point after the most recent debate. I told you about that yesterday. He was scheduled to do all sorts of fundraisers this week, including in New York, in Washington, in New Hampshire, but it is not happening, Lewis. The donations drying up after he made gaffe after gaffe on the national stage, including saying he would consider building a wall along the Canadian border. I guess, Lewis, he's taking some time to, hang out more with the Koch brothers. I mean his family.
Yeah, he really strikes me as the biggest piece of crap that was on that stage, possibly one of the biggest pieces of crap in the country. His sole mission in life is to make sure that the rich get richer, and on the backs of the poor and middle class.
Maybe what happened, Lewis, is that the campaign was becoming too much a distraction from his full-time job of destroying the Wisconsin economy, and the Koch brothers want him back where he can really make an impact.
Yeah, that could be what's happening here. You would have thought with Koch brother backing, he could have just swept this whole thing, but I guess it's not enough.
I don't know if people remember this, but back in April, I was out at a conference in Las Vegas. Sam Seder, host of The Majority Report, was also out in Las Vegas, and I was interviewed on his show, and we were talking about the 2016 Republican field, and he said he thought Scott Walker was going to be the eventual Republican nominee. I didn't think so at the time, and at least I don't remember agreeing with that at the time. And I haven't checked over the last 24 hours, Lewis, whether Sam has commented on this, but I would be very curious. Sam seemed very confident that Scott Walker would be the guy. And it did make a lot of sense in to the extent that Scott Walker is a Republican governor, which tends to be one of the better positions to be in if you're running on the Republican primary side, in terms of the backing he had, as you mentioned, from the Koch brothers, in terms of the success he's had destroying the economy of Wisconsin. That always scores many points with you. If you can either destroy companies or state economies or kill jobs, you're very well placed to be the Republican nominee.
And he does have that aura about him, right? He does have that presidential aura. It's true, as ridiculous as it sounds.
Well, I don't think he has a presidential aura by the standards of right-wing lunatics.
Yes, that's exactly what I mean. Still, look at George Bush. It's like the same type of aura.
There is another upside to Scott Walker dropping out, which is that maybe they'll allow Bobby Jindal to join the big kids debate as opposed to the second-tier debate, and that should be funny, if nothing else.
He'll probably be the next person to drop from the race, right? Let's be honest here.
He very well may be. I think it could be Jindal, but it also could be... I think Jindal is a top candidate. I hate to say it because he's actually one of the more reasonable guys within the context of the Republican Party, but Rand Paul is doing so poorly that he may be out sooner than we imagine.
still managed to land on the big kids table at that debate, while Jindal is still, everyone who was in that first debate might as well just drop out right now.
All right, we have a follow-up from Donald Trump regarding this crazy anti-Muslim nut who stood up at a Donald Trump event, as I told you about yesterday, and said, "Hey, Donald Trump, we have a problem in this country. That problem is Muslims. Barack Obama is a Muslim, and they're going to put us in concentration camps and kill us. What do you plan to do about it?" After that incident, Donald Trump went on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, and George Stephanopoulos attempted numerous times to get Trump to just say, hey, is President Obama from the U.S. or is he not from the U.S.? Is he a Muslim or is he not a Muslim? Very simple questions, right, Lewis? Questions that we know the answers to. Donald Trump refusing multiple times to answer. And at this point, you could say, well, who cares what Donald Trump thinks? No, Donald Trump for years has been on the birther forefront, arguing that the birth certificate is fake, arguing that President Obama was not born in the United States, blah, blah, blah. And now listen to Donald Trump's attitude with regard to that question when pressed respectfully by George Stephanopoulos. Take a look.
Let's get into this controversy that's come up over the last couple of days. I saw your tweets yesterday where you say you didn't have a moral responsibility when that questioner got up and said those things about President Obama. But this is getting a lot of attention in part because you've raised questions like this in the past. So for the record, was President Obama born in the United States?
Well, I don't get into it, George. I talk about jobs. I'm talking about the military. I don't get into it. I mean, they asked that question, and I just want to talk about the things because, frankly, it's of no longer interest to me. We're beyond that, and it's just something I don't talk about. I want to talk about the military. I want to talk about the vets and how badly they're treated. I want to talk about jobs. I don't get into that, George.
Well, the way to get beyond it is to answer yes or no. Do you believe?
Well, that's possible, but I don't get into it, and I just don't talk about it.
So, and even though you've raised questions, you've investigated this in the past, you're still...
Well, people thought I should have defended. Some people thought I should have defended the president in terms of the question that was asked the other night, and my attitude is, would he have done that for me if somebody said that about me? And, he's been, he's very capable of defending himself, believe me. So we'll see what happens, but I think the tweets really covered it very well and very accurately. Somebody said they were excellent. They covered the subject. And it was very interesting because I got in hot water over not saying anything. The first time it's ever happened to me. I didn't say anything, and everybody was going crazy over the weekend, and this is something where I didn't even say anything.
But I take that point, but you've raised these questions so often in the past. Why can't you just say definitively yes or no?
Well, I
President
haven't raised
Obama
the question.
is born in the United States. You've raised it many times, and he's not a Muslim.
George, you have raised the question. I haven't raised the question. I don't talk about it, and I don't like talking about somebody else's faith. He talks about his faith, and he can do that. But I don't talk about other people's faith. It's not appropriate for me to talk about somebody else's faith.
Right. He doesn't get into it, Lewis. That's not what he does. He's no longer interested in it. He's beyond it. How convenient that all of a sudden now Donald Trump is beyond this entire thing. And George Stephanopoulos is 100% spot on. Trump has been raising this topic for a long time. Just answer the question. Do you have any reason to believe President Obama is either not from the United States or a Muslim? And Donald Trump just will not answer.
Is he afraid that somehow this will harm his rating? It's strange because it's not like by saying nothing here, you are staying out of it, right? I mean, it seems like to me when someone decides not to address one of these questions, it means that they just don't want to say that, yes, Barack Obama is a Muslim or might be a Muslim or might be Kenyan or might be Indonesian or whatever.
I think you're getting at what is going on here, which is aside from whether you believe Donald Trump is racist, and quite frankly, I don't even care about that question. Donald Trump is very popular with racists, and that does create a context in which he would be inclined just not to comment, because the reality is, no, Donald Trump probably does not personally think that President Obama is a Kenyan Muslim. But if he just comes out and says, of course he's not, George, of course he's not, that will hurt him with some of those groups with whom he's popular.
Yeah. And if I guess he doesn't want to lose the endorsement of David Duke. So
that's a big endorsement, Lewis.
It is. And so I think Trump is just playing politics.
The Donald Trump decline is well on its way, already losing 8 points in the Republican primary poll after last week's second Republican debate. The decline will continue. Mark my words. We'll take a break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
If you like this show, if you listen a couple times a week or every day or check out some of our clips on YouTube, you might consider supporting the work that we are doing. We are not like big corporate media shows that have millions of dollars of support from big corporations or media conglomerates. We're actually mostly funded by our audience, and for just pennies a day, you get not only the knowledge that you are voting with your dollars and doing a very good thing in supporting alternatives to corporate media, we also produce members-only content every single day, an entire additional show just for our paid subscribers. And today's new member of the day is Crespo. And Louis, I don't know if this is some sort of nickname or if Crespo really has the same first name as last name.
I don't know either, but I'd be interested in finding out. So please let us know.
And what I can assure you of is that at davidpakman.com/membership, you can join Crespo as a supporter of alternatives to homogenous corporate media. Please do, because that's why the program has grown to the extent that it has over the last 5 or 6 years. Okay, Carly Fiorina, in one of the less publicized statements she made in last week's Republican debate, did all but say that marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol. She said, quote, "We are misleading young people when we tell them that marijuana is just like having beer. It's not." She's right. She was implying that marijuana is more dangerous than beer, though, and the reality is that marijuana is far less dangerous than alcohol. And I've often said this, and I will say it again. How can we trust someone's ideas if their ideas are based on a fundamental misunderstanding of basic facts? Yes, marijuana has been shown to decrease sperm count. It has been shown to negatively impact brain development when smoked by adolescents. It can impair driving. But let's analyze, Louis, whether it is actually more dangerous than alcohol. There's a 2010 study published in The Lancet, and it found that alcohol is actually one of the most dangerous drugs in the world, far more dangerous than marijuana. If we rank drugs by their harm to the user, or by their harm to others, or by their health impact, or their impact on crime, or the socioeconomic effect, on all fronts, alcohol, followed by heroin, crack cocaine, meth, regular cocaine, and tobacco, are more dangerous than alcohol. And let's look at some of the very specific facts. 0 people have reportedly died from a marijuana overdose, whereas alcohol poisoning kills over 2,000 people a year in the United States alone. There are 88,000 alcohol-related deaths in the U.S. per year. According to one study, as I mentioned, marijuana doubles the risk of being involved in a fatal car accident. Alcohol multiplies that risk 14 times. And on a per user basis, far more people end up in the emergency room because of alcohol than because of pot. This is a really important thing to understand, Louis, if you're going to be making policy on drugs.
Yeah, well, luckily, I think Americans are starting to realize this. So public opinion of this is changing. We know that. And so I don't think fear-mongering by Carly Fiorina is really going to change much. I guess she does have to say this stuff to kind of pander to her base, but we are headed in the right direction.
It is important to restate the most important, the most key element here, which is if you don't know the facts, you're not going to make good policy. If you think the earth is flat, are you going to make good decisions about science or funding NASA or whatever? If you think, I don't know, if you think Jews make up 10 or 20% of the world population, as many people do, Are you going to make reasonable decisions about Middle East foreign policy? I would argue no. If you think that birth control is an abortion, are you going to make good decisions about women's health? No, no, and no. And along the same lines, if you think marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol, the exact same logic applies. There is outrage, Lewis, that Saudi Arabia has been selected to be in charge of a key United Nations human rights panel. Saudi Arabia, a country with arguably the worst record in the world on human rights when it comes to women, minorities, dissidents, whatever, has been selected to head a UN human rights panel. As the head of a group of 5 world diplomats, this would give Saudi Arabia the power to select applicants from around the world for scores of expert roles in countries where the UN has a mandate on human rights. UN Watch Executive Director Hillel Neuer said that the appointment may have been a sort of consolation prize for the Saudis after they withdrew their bid to head the 47-nation council following international condemnation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's human rights record. This is just utterly insane. Saudi Arabia recently posted a job ad for 8 new executioners to keep up with the increased number of executions there. And now they're going to be given a say on an important human rights panel. We're living in bizarro world.
I think this just goes to show the power of the country, the power of the royal family, and the power of oil. How else, in what other world would this happen? I mean, this is all a result of oil, money, and power.
Well, the same spokesperson, Hillel Neuer, said, quote, "It's a sad comment on our world that oil continues to trump basic human rights principles." And as many people know, Saudi Arabia has not signed the International Bill of Human Rights. They have not signed the convention relating to the status of refugees. They have not signed the International Convention for the Suppression of Terrorist Bombing. There is widespread torture in Saudi Arabia. Obviously, they have corporal punishment, including whippings. They have public beheading executions, rampant human sex trafficking and sex slavery, laughable record on women's rights, a fantasy world of criminality for stuff like sorcery and witchcraft. We have an upside down world when Saudi Arabia is sitting on a human rights panel. Saudi Arabia is the number 1, or at least in the top 3 offenders when it comes to human rights, and they are essentially being given authority over human rights around the world. It's disgusting.
This is just as laughably ridiculous as North Korea defending its human rights record. Saudi Arabia has no place here.
Bigoted Kentucky County Clerk Kim Davis has inspired a mayoral candidate to advocate for the jailing and elimination of all gay people. Mayoral candidate Eugene Holmes, who's running for mayor in the Charlotte suburb of Kings Mountain, North Carolina, wants to, quote, eradicate homosexuality and throw all LGBT people in jail. He has been inspired by bigoted, anti-gay, delusional lawbreaker County Clerk Kim Davis in Kentucky. He considers her, Lewis, a sort of role model. He said, quote, "In my administration, I would do just like Mrs. Davis did in Kentucky. If you elect me, I'll uphold the law of the state of North Carolina. I would get the DA to swear out a warrant on any man who says he's gay. Sodomy is a crime, a felony in the state of North Carolina." Another small government conservative, right, who wants the government only to do the minimum it needs to do, which includes figuring out the personal sexual orientation of individuals and prosecuting them on that basis.
It really creeps me out when someone in office starts talking about sodomy.
Well, he's not in office yet.
Well, okay. Well, you know what I mean. In general, if they are campaigning on that, it just, if that's your focus, there is something seriously wrong with you, and I don't trust you at all. I don't even want you on the planet Earth.
Reality check, just in case you care about the facts, and I know a lot of people obviously don't. North Carolina sodomy statutes were invalidated by the 2003 Supreme Court decision in Lawrence v. Texas. So it doesn't actually seem like he could arrest anyone for, quote, sodomy you may be interested to know that Holmes is a member of the Church of God and also the Promise Keepers, which is a men's religious organization, both groups that to me raise significant red flags. He's also interested in banning alcohol, banning divorce, and banning all immigration to the United States, which of course is a policy that would have prevented his family from ever coming to this country, but that obvious hypocrisy not standing in the way of lunatic political statements.
Can you imagine banning divorce and alcohol? I mean, it seems like you have to have at least one of the two for a functioning society.
Oh, it's teabag or bingo, Lewis. He's checking off all the boxes. I think I just won. He was also placed in a psychiatric ward for treatment after a judge found he needed evaluation following charges of unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. He says he was diagnosed as suffering from religious hallucinations. Elect this man. This is exactly who the religious right nuts want to have in office. Wow. Let's take a break. After the break, we will look at the right-wing talking point, which argues that it doesn't matter what gun laws you pass, they won't affect criminals because criminals, by definition, don't care about the laws when they look for weapons. We will explore that after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me once again on the show today is Evan DeFilippis, who's a data journalist for the new gun violence magazine, The Trace, and also co-founder of the website Armed with Reason. There's a really interesting new article, Evan, that you guys have up called Gun Rights Advocates Claim Criminals Don't Follow Gun Laws. Here's the research that shows they're wrong. And I like this because it attacks a very specific talking point we hear from the more guns in more places side all the time, which is, what's the point of any gun laws? What's the point of regulations? Because by definition, criminals won't follow the laws, and thus it doesn't really matter what the laws are. You've broken this down into a number of component parts. Talk to us about your sort of first investigation into this and what you generally turned up.
Well, thanks for having me back on the show, David. Really appreciate it. So basically the impetus behind this article was to sort of challenge this common refrain among gun advocates. You know, there's sort of a tendency to transform policy debates into bumper sticker slogans. We've all heard things like, guns don't kill people, people kill people. When you outlaw guns, only the outlaws have guns. And so there's this other common refrain, which is that criminals don't follow laws, and therefore gun control can only hurt law-abiding citizens. So as you mentioned in the beginning, right, it's absurd on its face. Why have any laws at all? That, you know, murderers, thieves, rapists, they rarely follow laws that prohibit murder and theft and so on and so forth. So the first way that we challenge this is by just noting what should seem sort of obvious on its face, which is that criminals routinely respond to incentives. Criminals do, in fact, respond to laws, even if the most hardened criminals don't. And sort of one of the ways that we attack this that's rather intuitive is to just look at the way that traffic laws govern behavior. I mean, no one would advocate not having stop signs or red lights based on the notion that people who are really committed to running red lights are going to do so anyway, right? So, and clearly traffic laws have prevented a tremendous number of automobile fatalities and so on. So there are clear reasons for having laws because they do change the incentives that criminals confront. And just as it's true with traffic laws, it's also true with gun laws. And we investigate a lot of the instances in which gun laws do empirically reduce crime.
And I'd love to hear from you on a couple different points, what you turned up. I mean, one is that we can sort of intuitively know that, okay, fine, somebody who is going to have a gun illegally is going to figure out a way to get a gun. But it would seem to me that when you limit the number of guns sort of flowing through the system, you do make it more difficult for someone willing to get a gun on the black market to get such a gun. And you actually looked into that, how the flow of guns in the gray market is affected by the laws that are passed.
So that's right. There's this really fantastic research that was recently conducted by Dr. Cook at Duke University and some of his colleagues. And what he did was he conducted research with gang members, he conducted interviews with them in Chicago. And what he found was that Chicago, which has extremely strict gun control, including prohibition of certain classifications of weapons, high capacity magazines, so on and so forth, these regulations directly influence the prices that criminals confronted in secondary black markets. So, for example, he mentions in an interview that one gang member reported paying something like $50 for 10 bullets of a Beretta semi-automatic. And this is 50 times what the cost would be had the criminal had access to what it would be on a standard private market. And the interview lists a tremendous number of different, challenges that criminals face as a result of regulations on the primary market. One criminal, for example, mentioned that because Chicago gun laws were so strict, the majority of gang members who want to get their hands on a gun simply go to Indiana or Mississippi. One gang member flat out admitted to just going to southern states, getting official gun licenses in southern states, purchasing guns legally, and then taking them back to Chicago and selling them in the black market. So what Cook revealed was that, contrary to popular belief, although it is the case that the most hardened criminals won't follow laws, criminals are deterred in a large part because of the sort of price hikes that they face due to regulations in the primary market.
All right. And then the other one I want to talk about is background checks. And again, sort of similar logic is what's at least attempted by those who are in favor of more guns in more places, which is stricter background checks are only going to impact those who are willing to subject themselves to the background check system and get a gun legally. Same logic. If you're going to get the gun to commit a crime or illegally, the specific nature of restrictions on background checks is not going to affect you in any way. But it turns out that background checks do have an impact on illegal gun ownership.
Exactly. And there's a couple ways that we can know this. The first is to just look at federal Brady background checks. And sort of the simplest way to know that background checks are doing something, at least on the federal level, is that from 1994 to 2012, something like 2.4 million federal firearm applications, it's about 1.6%, have been denied, which means that even after the implementation of federal background checks, criminals were still going to federal vendors of guns and trying to get a gun, even though they knew that they were a prohibited person. So at least in sort of the most superficial way possible, we know that there is some rejection of prohibited persons coming back. And then, however, there have been much more sophisticated evaluations demonstrating that background checks do decrease the likelihood that a criminal is going to obtain guns. Probably the most persuasive come from Johns Hopkins University, conducted by Dr. Webster and his colleagues. And the first study looked at this Missouri law that was repealed in 2007. And this law required any individual who wanted to purchase a gun to show a permit, and that permit itself was contingent on passing a background check. Well, when this law was repealed in 2007, it led to a rather immediate increase in 14% in the homicide rate, which meant something like, between 49 and 68 murders a year, simply as a result of repealing this law. And then a second study conducted by the same people evaluated a law in Connecticut in 1995. And this law was pretty similar to the law in Missouri. It required individuals had to show a permit prior to obtaining a gun. And what they found was that there was a 40% reduction as a result of this 1995 law compared to what would have happened in the absence of the law. And there was an appreciable decrease in suicides as well. And perhaps the most interesting thing was there was not a concomitant increase in the number of homicides committed by weapons other than guns. So this is a common talking point among gun advocates that if criminals don't want to commit a crime with a gun, they can simply turn to a knife or what have you to commit the same crime. But what Webster studies found was that there was no such substitution effect.
Evan, did you see the recent study that was completely obvious and intuitive in terms of what it uncovered, which is that there's a correlation between a higher homicide rate in states with more relaxed gun laws and a lower homicide rate in states with stricter gun laws. Did you see that recently?
Right. There's a couple of, I'm not sure exactly what study you're referring to, but there's a couple of studies that all point to, similar ideas. There was a study conducted by Dr. David Hemingway at the Harvard School of Public Health.
That's the one.
Okay, yeah. So basically, from what I understand of the study, what he did was he looked at homicide data in terms of firearm homicide and aggravated assault, different types of crime, violent crimes that are committed with firearms, and he just ran regressions. And what the outcome of the study was, as you mentioned, the rather intuitive result was that states with weaker gun laws and higher levels of gun ownership were strongly associated with increases in violent crimes that are committed with guns and homicides that are committed with guns. And similarly, there wasn't a substitution effect. So these were net increases in homicide.
So what I wanted to ask you about in general with that is when we did that story, a lot of the reaction that we got from the sort of pro-gun side was two general ideas. One was you're looking at state level data, but you should really consider that within some of those strict gun law states, you have individual cities with very, very high gun crime rates, Chicago being an example of that. And then the other sort of general response we got from the pro-gun crowd was that overall, we've seen the crime rate go down in the United States, so that there's this sort of arbitrary delineation on a state-by-state basis and sort of a desire to write off the results as far as that goes. What's the right way to sort of synthesize those talking points, and how can we think about that more accurately?
So there's a lot of complexity in that. The basic gist of it is that it's even if it is the case that crime is going down, there's no strong evidence at all to suggest that the force that is driving those decreases in crimes are increases in the gun ownership rate. For starters, there is no strong evidence that gun ownership is even increasing at all. Even if the total number of guns is increasing, what research shows is that it is among people who already own guns. So you have a couple of collectors who have an arsenal of weapons, and they continue to purchase more and more guns. So the only way that gun crime and violence could be decreasing is if more people were getting guns who never had guns and were perhaps carrying these in public. Well, we don't see that. There is not an actual increase in guns, and there also is not a decrease in crime as well. I mean, this Hemingway study that you referenced showed that when you analyze it by the state level, more guns leads to more homicides. It's extremely robust research showing that more guns leads to more suicides and accidents and of this nature. And even if it is the case that there are, a couple of violent cities that are driving increases in crime, the evidence shows that the reason that those cities are driving crime is largely due to the fact that there are a heavy concentration of guns in those areas. So Chicago, even in spite of its high levels of gun regulation, the research shows that their violence is fueled by the availability of guns because it's surrounded by neighboring states with weak gun laws. I mentioned Indiana, for example, and there's trafficking that goes into Chicago. So basically, no matter what your unit of analysis is, states, cities, you can look at aggregate national data, more guns causes more homicides, suicides, and accidents. And there's very little evidence to suggest otherwise.
Let me remind everybody, the new gun violence magazine is called The Trace. We've been speaking with a data journalist from The Trace, Evan DeFilippis. I'm on the mailing list for The Trace. A lot of very, very interesting work being done there. Evan, thanks as always for being on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Many of you are no doubt familiar with AVG antivirus. Antivirus software is a sort of controversial thing, Lewis. I mean, it's very common that the predominant or popular antivirus software later is determined to actually be malware of sorts and causes all sorts of system draining resource usage and so on and so forth. And for years, a very popular antivirus software was AVG. They have now announced that their new privacy policy will allow them to collect user details and to sell them to online advertisers for the purpose of funding their free product. AVG has a free version of their antivirus, and then they have a paid version, sort of a freemium model. This is going to start on October 15th, and they say, quote, "We collect non-personal data to make money from our free offerings so we can keep them free, including advertising IDs associated with your device, browsing and search history, including metadata, internet service provider, and mobile network information for what you use to connect to our products, and information regarding other applications you may have on your device and how they are used." Now, they say, Lewis, that they will not sell personal data like name, email, home address, credit card details, etc., but that sometimes these do leak inside your browser history, and that when that happens, they do everything they can to delete those details before selling the data. On the one hand, lots of people are understandably panicking about this. On the other hand, some people are saying, hey, a lot of antivirus companies are doing this. They're just not admitting it.
Yes, I understand what's happening here. It's clear, most people are using the free version of this software. They feel that if they need to stay afloat and offer it, that this has to be done. So, if you are freaking out about this, there are some alternatives. Find different software or pay for software that will not, where they won't harvest this information.
Right. Well, I was looking at reviews of antivirus software, and unbeknownst to me, a ton of the common ones, like McAfee, for example, and some others, are now considered to be essentially bogus. I haven't really found a 100% answer on this, but it seems that, for example, Bitdefender and Malwarebytes are good ones to be using right now, but over time it changes, and we find out, remember when Norton was bundled with everything, and then it turned out to be a train wreck?
Yeah, I never liked Norton. It was another one of those resource hogs, and you run it, and all of a sudden, your computer feels like it's 10 years old. It's just a complete disaster.
We've talked previously about totally self-driving cars being on the forefront. We've talked about some of them being used in test areas, like, for example, on the Google campus. We've also talked about self-driving trucks being used on private mining roads in Canada. And we've also talked about self-driving vehicles being used on public roads, but with a driver sitting in the driver's seat, able to take over control at any time. But now, for the first time, we will have totally self-driving vehicles on public roads in the Netherlands. This is something called the WePod, and it will take passengers between two towns, the towns of Wageningen and Eddy in the province of Gelderland, starting in November. There's a mouthful, Lewis. And this is going to be a super advanced system that will allow you to, through an online system, reserve a ride, tell them where you want to be picked up, where you want to be dropped off, etc. During the test phase, the vehicles will not travel when there's rush hour traffic, they won't travel at night, and they won't travel during bad weather. And there will also be a control room that is sort of supervising everything that's going on remotely. These are 6-passenger vehicles, and they will have a maximum speed of 25 kilometers per hour, about 15 miles per hour, a little more than that. So this is absolutely fascinating, because every time we talk about this, Lewis, I get emails from people angry saying, David, there's never going to be autonomous vehicles. It's stupid. It's a fantasy. It seems like the real fantasy is pretending that this isn't already happening.
Of course it's going to happen. It is happening. It works. The technology works. And eventually it'll be completely ubiquitous. And if you don't like that, well, I don't know what to tell you. You can keep your car. You can move to the middle of nowhere, and hopefully you get to drive it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and more than likely, we are going to have for a very long time a hybrid system. I would be pretty satisfied with a system that eventually allows your vehicle to be controlled remotely, autonomously when you're, for example, on the highway. This would allow cars to be able to drive much closer together. It would prevent traffic jams by being able to change lanes in a way that doesn't cause problems the way we see now as you approach an exit or with a slow driver in the fast lane, etc. And then when you get onto surface roads, you take control of your vehicle. That alone would drastically increase safety. It would drastically reduce traffic, and it would still allow the people who say, hey, I like my Chevy truck and I want to keep driving it myself. It would, at least for a time, allow those people to keep control of their vehicle for a great portion of the driving.
And I do think for those people who are upset about this or disturbed by this, I don't think, I'm still not convinced that within the next maybe even 40 years, we will have roads full of autonomous vehicles. I mean, I think we are going to have both for quite some time. I think there's a good chance that you will be able to drive your car manually for the rest of your life, at least, currently as it seems right now.
All right, there is Lewis's prediction. We will see if it ends up coming true. On the bonus show today, Terrence Howard thinks 1 × 1 is 2. The NFL is fighting its own cheerleaders, and Richard Dawkins accuses Ahmed, who made the clock that some thought was a bomb, of fraud. All of those stories and more on today's bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. Don't miss it. Sign up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.